Today's activity brings us through getting ready to write our Unit 5 DBQ on the Industrial Revolution. You'll be using either the Venn diagram or the DBQ graphic organizer that are on the back bulletin board. You could even use your notebook paper, but we're going to consider how each document supports or refutes the prompt. And for the purpose of this activity, you're going to evaluate each of those documents through the lens of the prompt. Tomorrow we'll look at the thesis, claim, and contextualization, but basically this is how are you making your argument? And for contextualization, what is going on in the world at the same time that helps us understand this topic better? The evidence is really where we're supporting our thinking today. We're going to be looking at evidence from the documents, and we are going to use all 7 documents for the purpose of today, even though you can see how many documents you'll need to use on the AP exam in May. This will at least get us going in that direction so that we have more than enough ideas to put to paper. Evidence beyond the document is something that is not included in any of the documents. So it can be something from those specific regions that your question is asking about, or even a document that could exist in a different geographic space, or a document that could exist in the same geographic space, but in a different time period. It always needs to connect back to the prompt. And finally, for analysis and reasoning, there's a whole long decision rules component to it, but ultimately your analysis needs to be on at least 2 documents, looking at the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience, and I'm going to say or audience, for at least 2 of those documents. And then the complexity part comes into, are you doing both parts of the historical thinking skills? Are you speaking about these geographic regions and others? How are you making your argument show a deeper understanding of the material? So let's go. Our prompt is to develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which industrialization brought change to Britain and India during the time period 1750 to 1900. You're going to focus in on these 2 specific geographic regions and how industrialization brought change. Now, those changes can be increased industrialization. It can be changes in labor systems. It can be how there were differences between the 2 regions because of the natural resources of the regions. Keep focusing on how industrialization brings change to Britain and India during this time period. For our first document, you have a percentage distribution of the world's manufacturing production, 1870 and 1913. Please pause this video and take some notes about how you would use this to support your thinking about industrialization bringing change to India and Britain. In document 2, we have a short passage that is a memo number 2 on the moral poverty in India and native thoughts on the present British Indian policy. Please pause this video, read this document, and take notes about how does this support or refute the ideas of industrialization bringing change to India or Britain. In document 3, we have a very complex line graph showing gross domestic product per capita between 1500 and 1950. Remember, our question focuses in on 1750 to 1900, but the information before 1700 and the information after 1900 might help you explain your ideas. You see India and Britain both highlighted on this GDP graph. Please pause the video so you can take notes about how this supports your ideas. For document 4, women miners in the English coal pits, please pause the video, read this document, and consider how does this show industrialization bringing change to either India or Britain, 1750 to 1900. For document 5, the philosophy of the manufacturers excerpt, this has been updated for some clarity, but please pause this video so that you can read this. It should remind you of some of the activities that we have done in class and identify how you would use this document to support your ideas about industrialization bringing change to either India or Britain. In this image, you see a photograph from Bangalore. What I'd like you to do is to consider how do you see this as supporting your ideas about industrialization, bringing change to Britain and India, 1750 to 1900. And finally, number 7, the open letters to Lord Curzon on famines and land assessment in India. Please pause the video, read this document to consider how would you use this to support your ideas about industrialization bringing changes to India and Britain between 1750 and 1900. At this point, you may want to gather your ideas about how the changes of industrialization, how they happened in both England or Britain and India on a Venn diagram where you have them on opposite sides, but then you have that overlap in the middle of what documents would support the idea that there were some similarities between those two countries. Or you may choose to do something more in the lines of changes and continuities over time. If you're looking at the dates of those specific documents, how can that support you in suggesting that something that's going on in 1750, how does that change over time until 1900? And you may want to use something like an XY axis to show some changes on the top of the axis, some continuities on the bottom of the axis, but ultimately that x-axis indicating how you would see from 1750 to 1900. It's entirely up to you how you want to go about considering this prompt. Whichever historical thinking skill you choose to use should help guide you with either choosing a Venn diagram or some other graphic organizer. Maybe the XY axis works for you, maybe prefer a different one to show that change in continuity over time. We're going to use these notes in our class tomorrow, so please do